Hello again, my project maniacs. It's Mark Antonio here. We are in my garden and we are checking out some things that are happening. It's actually pretty exciting because since it started warming up, things have really taken off. So let's check it out. We have some carrots here that are finally taking shape. If you look at the bottom here, the base of the carrots are starting to widen. That means that the carrots are beginning to form. And when they're ready, we'll know by them just kind of popping out of the dirt line here, the soil line. These were planted first, and if you notice in the ones in the back, they're a little shorter. They were planted after, about 2 weeks after these were planted. So these will be ready first, and then I'll have those later on. That type of gardening is called succession planting. We have some tomatoes here that were about this size when I planted them, and they've already doubled in size, which is really, really cool. These are gonna be some slicing tomatoes, and we have some cherry tomatoes over here. We also have a basil plant that's coming up here. Very, very small right now, but as I said, since it has gotten warmer, the plants are really taking off. The other important piece in the garden are plants that bring in our bees and our other pollinators. These I planted 2 seasons ago. These are my coneflowers. They're beautiful. We call them echinaceas. They have these purple flowers. We also have garlic that's mixed in with our pollinators, with our coneflowers. And it's something exciting happening. The first stage of the garlic is happening here. These are garlic scapes. These are so incredibly tasty. And it's really important to cut these off in order to get energy back in your garlic bulbs that are growing underneath, right? You're not gonna be able to see them, but they're growing at the end of this. And if we cut our garlic scapes off and we can cook these are really delicious. And you cook these, but after you cut these off, it really helps to make bigger garlics. Finally got a chance to plant these peppers actually a couple days ago, and they're already growing since then, again because this is a perfect time for our plants to thrive. All these plants are thriving not only because of the warmth. Another thing that plants really thrive off is really healthy soil. Small microorganisms, they break down the soil and they make it really, really healthy. There are other insects that also help the soil other than those tiny microorganisms that we can't see. And one of those really, really huge helpers are worms. And I'm going to show you today how to build your own worm farm. So the items that you're going to need to build your own worm farm is a small container, preferably something that you can see through. That way you'll be able to see how the worms work. You're going to need some dirt. And you're going to need some food scraps. I'm gonna get the food scraps from my compost bin that I collect on my countertop. And you're going to need some worms. You can hunt for worms outside in moist, shady areas, probably where you're gonna find your most worms. But today, I'm not gonna be hunting for them because I grow my own worms. Let me show you my worm farm. I've been growing these worms for a while. I feed them lots of different items. First, I start off with eggshells. They eat any sort of food scraps that we eat, but we don't want to give them anything that's cooked. We also can feed them paper. They love cardboard. They love grass clippings. They also will eat coffee grounds. They really like that. They also will eat bananas. That's one of the I think one of their favorite things to eat. They will eat anything, as I said before, anything that we are cutting up to have for dinner. Any sort of food scrap that we are planning on throwing away, or maybe even if you have a compost, you want to put it in your compost, you can use that to feed your worms. Some things not to feed your worms. So you don't want to put milk in your worm farm. You don't want to put anything that's oily in your worm farm. And you don't want to put really large pieces of things in your worm farm, because it's going to take your worms a longer time to break it down, and you don't want it to get smelly. So let's start off with getting some soil in our jar. My soil is mixed in with some eggshells that I grounded up, and it also has some coffee grounds in here. So the worms have a really nice start with this soil. Let's just put our worms in. But you know what? Before that, we need to understand also that worms need moisture. They can't swim, but they need the soil to stay moist. If the soil doesn't stay moist, then the worms will have trouble breathing, because worms actually breathe through their skin. So remember to keep your soil moist. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of moisture to my soil. And again, not sopping wet, just a little bit of moisture. So I got myself some worms, and I found some worm eggs. So I'll add a couple of these worm eggs in with the worms. Worm eggs will hatch after a few weeks. They will hatch about 4 or 5 tiny worms each. So we have 5 worms here, and we have 2 worm eggs here. How many worms do we potentially have in all? 5. We get about 5 more from this guy, and we'll get about 5 more from that guy. So I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds. Some of you have it. Yep, 15 worms in all. But here's a secret. Worms will lay more eggs. So before you know it, you'll have way more than 15 worms in this one little space, which is fine, because these red wigglers like to be in a tight spot. They don't mind it at all, and they will eat your food scraps even faster when they start to multiply. But you don't want to keep them in this space. And if once they start to multiply even more, you want to think about getting them a larger area to live in. So you can start off here, and then eventually you can grow your worm farm to be as large as mine. So the next thing I'm going to do is add some food for our worms. Did I mention that they like to eat paper? They do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of paper. But before I add the paper, I'm going to give them some food scraps from my compost. I have some avocado skin. Break that up and put it in there. Now, as the avocado skin breaks down, the worms will eat those. Obviously, because they have no teeth, they can't eat the skin as it is. There's some spent flowers from the flower vase, so I'll just break that up and put it in there. And maybe, I'll give them some coffee grounds. Scoop out some coffee grounds, put it in there. There we go. That should be enough to get the worms started. And then I'm going to cover it with some paper. Now the paper will do two things. It will feed the worms eventually. While we're waiting for the worms to eat the paper will also serve as a covering for your worm farm. So the worms won't want to leave, and the paper will keep the worm farm nice and moist underneath. So another thing to remember is that worms hate light. They will scurry away from the light each time any light gets turned on, or during the daytime they won't really do much. So one thing I would recommend is to either keep it in a closet in a dark, cool place, or you can simply wrap it with an old newspaper, just like this. And then you can just put a little tape on it just to keep it wrapped. And then you can lift off the paper whenever you want to see what the worms are doing. There you have it. We have our worm farm. Our worms are happy. They're making really, really healthy fertilizer for our soil. So eventually the worms will make enough for me to scoop out the fertilizer, put it on my plants or on my seeds that I'm starting, and I'll just keep on feeding them and they will make more fertilizer for me. And you can do the same. If you have any questions, you can leave your comments below, or if you've already built a worm farm or planning on building a worm farm, please share that photo with us. You can post your photos at Most After School on Instagram or at Project Most on Facebook. Also, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the comments below. I'm Mark Antonio. It's great to see you again, friends.